"Don't drink that, sir." The boy said it from below the level of the table, which was where he had been for the past 40 seconds, crouched behind the long white tablecloth with both knees on the cold marble floor and one hand pressed flat against the base of the table leg to keep himself from sliding. He was 9 years old, dark brown skin, close-cropped hair, wearing a white dress shirt that was too big at the collar and black trousers that had been pressed that morning by his mother with the small iron she kept under the sink. His name was Marcus Webb, and he had been brought to the Alderton Grand Hotel that evening because his mother, Diana, had been waitressing at events like this one for 11 years, and the babysitter had cancelled at 4 o'clock, and there was no one else. The man above him did not hear him. Edward Holt was 73 years old, the founder of Holt Meridian Industries, a man whose name appeared on the side of a building in 4 different cities, and on the donor wall of 2 universities, and in the financial pages of every major newspaper at least once a month. He was also, at this particular moment, reaching across the white tablecloth for the glass of water that had appeared at his place setting in the last 3 minutes. The glass Marcus had watched a man in a dark jacket set down with careful, unhurried hands, while the room's attention was on the stage where the evening's first speaker had just begun. Marcus had seen the man in the dark jacket approach the table from the service corridor on the left side of the ballroom. He had seen him because Marcus had been watching the service corridor for the past hour, because that was where his mother came and went, and watching the corridor was how he kept track of her. He had seen the man come through the door, not in the white uniform of the hotel's catering staff, but in a dark jacket of the kind that blended into the edges of formal events without belonging to them. He had seen the man set the glass down at Edward Holt's place, setting with the specific, deliberate care of someone who was not a waiter, but was imitating one. And he had seen the color. The water in Edward Holt's glass was not quite right. It was water, clear, still, nothing obvious about it to a person not looking carefully. But Marcus had been sitting 2 tables back for an hour, watching waiters bring water to tables, and the water in all the other glasses caught the chandelier light the same way, with the same slight blue-white refraction. The water in Edward Holt's glass caught it differently, not dramatically, not in a way anyone would notice unless they had been watching water glasses for an hour with nothing else to do. Marcus had been watching water glasses for an hour with nothing else to do. He had gotten up from his chair when the lights lowered for the first speaker. He had moved through the darkened edge of the room the way he moved through all spaces, carefully, without calling attention to himself. He had reached Edward Holt's table and gone under it in the moment when the applause for the first speaker covered any small sound he might make. And then he had lifted the glass from beside Edward Holt's right hand and replaced it with the identical glass from the adjacent, empty place setting. He had done this in 4 seconds. He was now crouching under the table with the original glass held in both hands, the water moving very slightly in the glass, trying to decide what to do next. "Don't drink that, sir," he said again, louder. Edward Holt looked down. He had been reaching for his glass, a habitual gesture, the gesture of a man who drank water at dinner tables without thinking about it, the way you breathe, and the glass was not there. He looked down at the tablecloth where it should have been. Then he looked under the table, because the alternative explanation was that the glass had somehow traveled on its own, and Edward Holt was a man who preferred rational explanations. He found a small boy in a white shirt crouching on the floor of the Alderton Grand Hotel ballroom, holding a glass of water in both hands, and looking up at him with the specific expression of a child who has done something he is not entirely certain was the right thing and is now waiting to find out. "What in the world?" Edward Holt said. He did not say it angrily. He said it in the tone of a man who has seen a great many things in 73 years and has recently stopped being surprised by most of them, but has just encountered an exception. "I think something is wrong with your water," Marcus said. He held up the glass. The color is different. Not very different, but different. Edward Holt looked at the glass. Then he looked at the boy. Then he looked at the glass again. "Come out from under the table," he said quietly. Marcus came out from under the table. He stood beside Edward Holt's chair, holding the glass in both hands, very aware that several people at the surrounding tables were now looking at him. He kept his eyes on Edward Holt. "Show me," Holt said. Marcus held the glass up at an angle so that the chandelier light passed through it. Holt looked. He looked for a long moment, with the careful attention of a man who had spent 50 years making decisions based on what he actually saw rather than what he expected to see. Then he took the glass from the boy's hands. He did not drink from it. He held it at arm's length, at the same angle Marcus had shown him, and he looked at it the way a jeweler looks at a stone he is not yet certain about. "Sit down," he said to Marcus. "Next to me, right here." Marcus sat. The gala was the Meridian Foundation's annual fundraising dinner. 430 people in the Alderton Grand Hotel's largest ballroom. Black tie, $1,200 a seat, the kind of event where the room cost more per hour than most people earned in a month. It was held every October, and it raised money for education initiatives in low-income communities, which was a cause Edward Holt had been publicly committed to for 20 years and privately committed to for longer. The people who attended these dinners came for various reasons. Some came because they believed in the cause. Some came because a table at the Meridian Gala was a particular kind of social currency that operated in the specific economy of old money and new ambition. Some came because Edward Holt invited them personally, and declining Edward Holt's personal invitations was the kind of thing that had consequences in certain circles. And some, Marcus would later understand, came for reasons that had nothing to do with education or currency or invitations. His mother Diana had been working this gala for 7 of its 11 years. She knew the service corridors of the Alderton Grand the way she knew the layout of her own apartment, by feel, in the dark, without having to think about it. She knew which kitchen door stuck in cold weather and which elevator the hotel manager used when he wanted to check on events without being seen. She knew that the ballroom's east service corridor had a blind spot at the far end where the wall curved, and that the blind spot was large enough for a person to stand in without being visible from either the ballroom or the kitchen. She did not know that someone else knew about the blind spot too. Marcus had been sitting at the small table she had arranged for him near the back of the room. A staff accommodation, strictly unofficial, a folding chair, and a narrow table behind the last row of guest seating where he was invisible to the room but could see everything. She had given him a book and a small plate of food from the kitchen and told him not to move and not to talk to anyone. He had done 2 of those 3 things. The book had lasted 40 minutes. After that, he had watched the room, because watching rooms was what Marcus did when there was nothing else to do, in the way that some children fidgeted and some children talked, and Marcus watched. He had been doing it since he was small enough that his mother could bring him along without comment, sitting in corners of hotel ballrooms and conference centers and wedding venues while she worked, watching the particular theater of adults in formal clothes performing versions of themselves that they had carefully prepared in advance. He had noticed, over the years, many things. He had noticed that the people who laughed the loudest at formal dinners were almost never the most important people in the room. He had noticed that waiters who had been working an event for more than 2 hours developed a particular expression of controlled exhaustion that they turned off the moment a guest looked at them. He had noticed that the people who ate the least at these dinners were usually the ones who had the most money, as if wealth had a specific relationship with appetite that went in the opposite direction from what you might expect. And tonight, 40 minutes into the Meridian Gala, he had noticed a man in a dark jacket who was not a waiter. Edward Holt held the glass for almost a full minute without speaking. The first speaker continued on the stage. The room continued its polite attention. No one at the surrounding tables was looking at Marcus and the old man anymore. The moment had passed, the small disturbance absorbed back into the general flow of the evening. Holt set the glass down on the table in front of him, away from his place setting. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Marcus." "How old are you, Marcus?" "9. What are you doing here?" "My mom works here. She's a waitress. The babysitter canceled." Holt absorbed this. "And you noticed something wrong with the glass?" "The color was different. Just a little. But different." "You were watching the water glasses." "I was watching the service corridor. My mom comes through there. But I was also watching the glasses because there wasn't much else to watch." Holt looked at him. He had a particular quality of attention for a man his age, not the distracted attention of someone running several thoughts simultaneously, but the full, settled attention of someone who had learned that most of what you needed to know arrived through careful looking, and that the people who couldn't sit still long enough to look carefully missed most of it. "Tell me about the man," Holt said. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. "You saw me watching him." "I saw you get up from your chair when the lights went down. I saw where you went. I saw you go under the table." A pause. "I've been watching this room for 45 minutes. Not as carefully as you, apparently. But I've been watching." Marcus looked at his hands. Then he looked at the service corridor door on the left side of the ballroom. "He came through that door," Marcus said. "About 10 minutes before the first speaker started. He was wearing a dark jacket, not the hotel uniform, a different dark jacket. He walked like he knew where he was going, but he didn't look at anyone. People who know where they're going usually look at the people they're passing. He didn't." "What did he look like?" "Medium height, maybe 40. He had—" Marcus stopped. He was looking at the service corridor door. It had just opened. A man in a white hotel uniform came through it, carrying a tray. Behind him, for the 2 seconds the door was open, Marcus could see into the service corridor beyond. The narrow lit passage, the stack of trays on the left, and at the far end, where the wall curved into the blind spot his mother had described to him once, when she was tired and talking more than she usually did, the edge of a dark jacket. "He's still in the building," Marcus said. Holt's eyes moved to the service corridor door, which had closed again. "Are you certain?" "I saw his jacket, at the end of the corridor. He's in the blind spot at the far end." Holt was quiet for a moment. On the stage, the first speaker was wrapping up, the applause beginning to build. Around them, 400 people were doing what 400 people at formal dinners did when the first speech ended, shifting in their seats, reaching for their glasses, leaning toward the person beside them, reaching for their glasses. "Don't touch your glass," Marcus said suddenly. Holt looked at him. "Not just you," Marcus said, his voice lower, more urgent. "The table. Don't let anyone at the table touch their glass. Not until—" He stopped. He was thinking. He was thinking fast, the way he thought when something was moving and he needed to catch up to it. "We need someone to look at the water." Holt looked at the boy beside him. Then he reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out his phone. "I'm going to make a call," he said, very quietly. "I need you to stay in this seat. Don't move. Don't look at the corridor door. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "Good." Holt put the phone to his ear. He made the call with the same composure he used for all things, unhurried, low-voiced, precise. He spoke for 45 seconds. He said 3 things: the name of the hotel, the name of the ballroom, and a single phrase that Marcus heard clearly because he was sitting 18 inches away. He said, "I need you here now, Not in 10 minutes. He ended the call. He set the phone on the table beside the original glass. "Who did you call?" Marcus asked. "Someone I trust," Holt said. "Someone who will know what to do with that glass." He looked at Marcus. "You said he's in the blind spot at the end of the corridor. Does your mother know that corridor?" "She works it every year." "Where is she now?" Marcus looked toward the service door. His chest tightened again, differently this time. "She went through there about 15 minutes ago with a tray. She hasn't come back yet." Holt looked at him. Then he looked at the service door. "How long does she usually take?" 5 minutes, maybe 6. It had been 15. Marcus had been so focused on the glass, on the man, on getting under the table and back out again, and saying the right thing to the right person, that he had stopped counting the minutes since his mother had gone through that door. He was counting them now. 15 minutes. For a round trip that should have taken 6 at most. He stood up. "Sit down," Holt said quietly. "My mom is in there." "I know. Sit down, Marcus. Please." Something in the way the old man said, "Please," not as a command dressed in courtesy, but as an actual request from one person to another, made Marcus sit. He sat on the edge of the chair. His hands were flat on his thighs. He was watching the service door with the specific attention of someone who has just recalculated what is happening and does not like the new calculation. "The man in the corridor," Holt said, keeping his voice very low, leaning slightly toward Marcus. "You said he didn't look at anyone. You said he walked like he knew where he was going. Did he look at you?" Marcus thought. He replayed the 40 seconds he had watched the man move through the edge of the ballroom. The dark jacket, the controlled pace, the eyes that stayed forward. "No," Marcus said. "He didn't look at me." "You're certain?" "I was behind the last row of tables. He didn't look that far back." Holt nodded slowly. "That's good," he said. "That's important." He looked at the service door. "My security team will be here in 4 minutes. When they arrive, I'm going to stand up and walk toward that door. I need you to stay in this seat." "My mom is in there." "I know, and my people will find her. But if you go through that door, you change what the man in the corridor knows. Right now, he doesn't know anyone saw him. If a 9-year-old boy comes through the service door looking for his mother, that changes." Marcus looked at the door. He looked at Holt. He looked at his own hands flat on his thighs. 4 minutes, he said. 4 minutes. "You promise they'll find her?" Holt looked at him without the slight deflection adults sometimes used when they were making a promise they weren't entirely certain they could keep. He looked at Marcus directly. "Yes," he said. "I promise." Marcus sat back 1 inch in the chair. 1 inch was all he could manage. The 4 minutes passed in the particular way that 4 minutes passed when you were 9 years old, and your mother was in a service corridor with a man in a dark jacket, and the only thing keeping you in your chair was the word of a 73-year-old billionaire you had met 11 minutes ago. Marcus watched the room. He watched the service door. He watched the stage where the second speaker was now being introduced, and the 400 people in the ballroom were giving the second speaker their attention, the way they had given the first speaker their attention. The polite performed concentration of people who were present for reasons that had very little to do with listening. He watched Edward Holt, who sat beside him with the same settled composure he had shown since the moment Marcus had come out from under the table, one hand resting on the table, near but not touching the original glass, his phone face up on the tablecloth, his eyes on the stage. Watching Holt was instructive. Marcus had seen a lot of adults in difficult situations, not situations like this one, but difficult situations of various kinds, the kind that came with being poor and working hard and never quite having enough margin for when things went wrong. He had watched his mother in those situations. He had watched her keep her face composed while a landlord said something that made her jaw tighten. He had watched her talk to school administrators and hospital receptionists and bus drivers who were about to close the doors, and he had learned from watching her that the most important thing in a difficult situation was not what you showed, but what you kept from showing. Edward Holt was showing nothing. Not because he wasn't affected. Marcus could see, in the way the old man's hand rested very still near the glass, that he was. But he was keeping it from his face and his posture and the set of his shoulders, and the room around them had no idea anything had changed. Marcus tried to do the same thing. He mostly succeeded. At 3 minutes and 40 seconds, the service door opened. 2 men came through it. They were not in hotel uniform. They were in dark suits, moving with the specific efficiency of people who had been told where to go and what they were going there for. They went directly to Edward Holt's table, leaned in, spoke 2 sentences. Holt nodded once. He stood up with the unhurried ease of a man who has stood up from tables at formal dinners 10,000 times, folded his napkin, and said something to the woman on his left that appeared from a distance to be a routine excuse. Then he walked toward the service door. Marcus counted to 3. Then he followed. He had promised to stay in his seat. He had stayed for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. He decided that was close enough. The service corridor was narrow and brightly lit after the dimness of the ballroom, a utilitarian space of bare walls and stacked equipment and the particular smell of large-scale catering. Hot metal, clean linen, the ghost of 100 previous meals. It ran the full length of the ballroom's east wall and turned at the far end, where Marcus knew from his mother's description the wall curved into the blind spot. He came through the door in time to see one of the suited men disappearing around the curve at the far end. The other was standing halfway down the corridor with his phone to his ear. Edward Holt was walking fast, faster than Marcus had expected a 73-year-old man to walk toward the curve. And then Marcus heard his mother's voice. It came from around the curve, not a shout, not a scream, something that was trying not to be either of those things, a voice using the particular controlled register that Diana Webb used when she was frightened and didn't want whoever was frightening her to know how much. She was saying, "I told you I don't know what you're talking about." Marcus was running before he had decided to run. He came around the curve and stopped. The blind spot was a space perhaps 8 feet wide, where the corridor wall curved outward before turning toward the kitchen. His mother was against the wall, her tray on the floor, her hands at her sides, her face doing the thing Marcus had seen it do when she was talking to a landlord or a bill collector, composed, controlled, giving nothing away. In front of her, not touching her, but standing close enough that the distance communicated its own message, was the man in the dark jacket. He was maybe 40 years old, medium height, short dark hair. His face was the face of a man who had made a calculation and was waiting for it to complete. He heard Marcus come around the curve and turned. For a moment, nobody moved. The man looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the man. Diana looked at her son with an expression that went through 4 things in the space of a second: relief and fear and love, and the very specific maternal fury of a woman who had told her child to stay in his seat. Then one of Holt's suited men came around the curve from the other direction, from the kitchen end, and the man in the dark jacket turned toward this new arrival instead, and in the turning he stepped back from Diana, and the calculation in his face shifted into something else entirely. Edward Holt came around the curve from the ballroom end. He looked at the man in the dark jacket. He looked at Diana. He looked at Marcus. "Are you hurt?" he said to Diana. "No," she said. She had not moved from the wall. Her voice was steady. Holt looked at the man in the dark jacket. "Don't," he said simply. It was a single word delivered with the complete authority of a man who had never in his life needed to say anything twice. The man did not move. The suited man from the kitchen end had positioned himself at the corridor's far exit. The suited man from the middle of the corridor was now visible at the ballroom end curve behind Holt. The man in the dark jacket looked at the two exits. He looked at Holt. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Marcus for a long moment, with the expression of a person who is recalculating what went wrong and has just arrived at the part of the calculation that contains a 9-year-old boy. He said nothing. Edward Holt took out his phone. He made a second call. He spoke 4 words. "We're ready for you." Then he looked at Diana. "My people are going to stay here with this man until the police arrive. I'd like to ask you to take your son back into the ballroom and sit with him until someone comes to speak with you. Is that all right?" Diana looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at his mother. He could see the 4 things still moving in her face, fighting for position. "Come here," she said to Marcus. He went to her. She put one hand on the back of his head, briefly, pressing him against her side in the way she did when he was sick or frightened, the specific physical vocabulary of a mother saying, "I have you." Then she straightened and took his hand and looked at Edward Holt. "Thank you," she said. "Thank your son," Holt said. The police arrived through the hotel's main entrance 11 minutes later. They came quietly, without the theater of sirens or lights, in the particular way that police arrived when they had been called by someone whose call resulted in that kind of response. The man in the dark jacket was a man named Roy Castle. Marcus would learn this name later, along with other things, that Roy Castle had worked for a competitor of Holt Meridian Industries for 6 years and had left under circumstances that were not publicly disclosed, that he had been contracted by a person whose name took investigators 3 weeks to confirm, that the glass Marcus had taken from Edward Holt's place setting contained a compound that the hotel's contracted toxicologist identified as a sedative agent at a concentration sufficient to cause acute cardiac distress in a man of Holt's age and health profile. Sufficient, the toxicologist's report said, in the particular flat language of expert assessments, to be fatal under the right conditions. Marcus would read that phrase in a newspaper article 8 months later, sitting at the kitchen table in the apartment on Delmore Street while his mother made coffee. He would read it twice. He would think about the glass and the color of the water and the 40 minutes of watching water glasses with nothing else to do, and he would feel something pass through him that was not quite any of the emotions he had words for, something that lived between them and did not resolve neatly. His mother would look at him over the rim of her coffee cup and say, "What are you reading?" "An article," Marcus said, "about the Gala." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you all right?" He thought about it honestly. "Yes," he said. "I think so." She nodded. She sat down across from him at the kitchen table with her coffee and did not ask him to explain further, because Diana Webb had an accurate sense of when her son needed to talk and when he needed to sit with something until it settled. He sat with it until it settled. At the precinct that night, a detective named Sandra Okafor had taken Marcus's statement in a room with a table and 2 chairs and a vending machine visible through the window in the door. She had been patient and thorough and had asked him to go through what he had seen multiple times in multiple orders, which Marcus understood was how you checked whether a person was telling you what they remembered or telling you what they had decided to remember. He had told her the same things each time because he had seen the same things each time, and the things he had seen were the things he said. At the end of the interview, Detective Okafor had put her pen down and looked at him with the expression of a person who has just heard something that she is going to be thinking about for a while. "Marcus," she said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly before you answer. When you saw the man come through the service door, when you noticed the glass? Did you think about not saying anything? Marcus considered this. It was an honest question, and it deserved an honest answer. For a second, he said. I thought maybe I was wrong about the color, that I was seeing something that wasn't there. What made you decide you weren't wrong? I kept looking at it, Marcus said, and it kept looking wrong. Detective Okafor looked at him for a long moment. Then she wrote something in her notebook and said, That's good. That's the right way to do it. Marcus's mother was waiting for him outside the interview room. She had given her own statement in a separate room, what she had seen in the corridor, what had been said, the sequence of it. She looked tired in the specific way she looked tired after a long shift when something had gone wrong on top of it, the tiredness that went all the way down. She held his hand on the way to the car. In the parking lot, before they got in, she stopped and looked at him. You left your seat, she said. I know. I told you not to move. I know. She looked at him for a long moment in the parking lot of the county precinct, under the flat white light of the lot's overhead lamps. Then she pulled him into her and held him in the way she didn't usually hold him in public, the way that was less about comfort and more about making sure he was there, solid and real and present. He let her. After a moment, she let go and looked at him again. You left your seat, she said. Yes. And you were right to. He nodded. He had been right to. He knew it, and she knew it, and they both knew the other one knew it. But she had needed to say both things. The you left your seat, and the you were right too, because both of them were true, and she was a person who believed the truth had to be spoken fully, or it curled at the edges. Get in the car, she said. He got in the car. Edward Holt sent a letter. It arrived 2 weeks after the gala on a Thursday morning in an envelope of the kind that signaled its own seriousness by its weight and its texture. Heavy cream paper, black ink, the name Marcus Webb written in a hand that had clearly been the writer's best attempt rather than a hasty scrawl. Marcus read it at the kitchen table, while Diana stood in the kitchen doorway, drinking her coffee and trying not to look like she was watching him read it. The letter was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph said, "Thank you," in the particular way that a person said, "thank you," when the thing they were thanking you for was not a small favor, but a large one, and they were trying to find language adequate to the gap. The second paragraph said that Holt was establishing a scholarship fund in Marcus's name at the Meridian Foundation for students from low-income households pursuing higher education, and that this was not a reward for what Marcus had done, but a recognition that the kind of attention Marcus had brought to that evening was the kind of attention the world needed more of, and that the best way he could think of to honor it was to support the education of people who might bring it to other things in other places. The third paragraph was shorter. It said, "You noticed something when everyone else in a room of 400 people was looking somewhere else. That is a rare thing. Don't stop doing it." Marcus read the letter 3 times. He folded it carefully along its original creases and put it in the front pocket of his school bag, between his reading notebook and his pencil case. His mother was looking out the kitchen window when he looked up. She had stopped pretending not to watch him read it and was now simply looking at the street outside with the expression she had when she was thinking about something she hadn't yet found words for. "Mom," Marcus said. She looked at him. "The scholarship. It's for college. That's a long time from now." "Yes," she said. "It is. A lot could happen between now and then." She looked at him. Her expression was the expression of a woman who knew exactly what a lot could mean and had spent 11 years doing what she did so that a lot would have less room to happen. "A lot could happen," she agreed. "But some things, once they're done, stay done." She looked at the letter on the table between them. "He wrote it down," she said. "It's in writing. Written things have a way of holding. Marcus looked at the letter. He thought about the water glass and the color that had been wrong in a way he couldn't have put into specific words, but had kept looking wrong until he did something about it. He thought about the blind spot at the end of the service corridor and his mother's voice using the controlled register and Edward Holt saying, "I promise," and then keeping the promise. He thought about 400 people in a ballroom looking at the stage, and one person looking somewhere else. "Okay," Marcus said. He picked up his school bag. He put the letter in the front pocket between the reading notebook and the pencil case. "I'm going to be late." "Go," his mother said. "I'll see you tonight." He went. He walked the 6 blocks to school the way he walked them every morning, with both eyes open, paying attention to everything, the way his mother had taught him without knowing she was teaching him, simply by doing it herself for every one of the 11 years she had been moving through the world with careful attention and very little margin for error. He passed the hardware store on the corner where the owner was unlocking the front grate, and he noticed that the man had a new pair of glasses and seemed not to have gotten used to them yet, because he kept tilting his head at an angle that was not how you tilted your head when your glasses fit. He noticed a car parked in the same spot it had been parked for 4 days in a row, with a parking ticket from each day accumulating on the windscreen. He noticed a woman at the bus stop across the street, reading a book and smiling at something in it, and the smile was the kind of smile that arrived from a book and was different from every other kind of smile, more private, more complete. He noticed all of it. He wrote none of it down. He carried it the way he carried everything he noticed, internally, carefully, in the specific personal archive of a boy who had understood, earlier than most, that the world rewarded attention and punished inattention, and that the difference between the two was not talent or intelligence or luck, but simply the daily decision to keep your eyes open and take seriously what they showed you. The school was 4 blocks further, and the morning was cold in the particular October way that made your breath visible and your cheeks tighten, and Marcus walked through it with his hands in his pockets and his school bag on both shoulders and his eyes open. He was 9 years old. He had a scholarship with his name on it in a letter in his front pocket. He had a mother who was alive because he had been sitting in the right place with nothing to do but watch. And he had, somewhere in the back of his mind, the memory of water in a glass catching chandelier, light at the wrong angle, and the 4-second window in which he had decided that wrong was wrong, and that staying in your seat when wrong was happening was not something he was able to do. He had not stayed in his seat. He never would.